Hey guys, you're listening to the Energy of the Untamed Heart podcast, where we talk about uncaging your divinely gifted wild heart to be as free and expansive as you were born to be. My goal is to use our stories, guest interviews, and your questions to tease out what has been keeping your wild heart under wraps. I'm your host, Mielle Fox, and together we will shatter the myths of our old stories to set our wild heart free. So thanks for choosing you and showing up today. Today, my guest is Katherine T Kelly, officially Dr. Katherine T Kelly. But those of us who have so many letters after our name, sometimes that kind of gets crazy. And we're just like, no, just call me Fred. So Katherine's here with us today. We're going to have a conversation about all the things evolution, all the things to get back to who we really are, why our soul is here, and how do we unravel some of the raveling so that we can really live in our best expression of ourselves. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Katherine T. Kelly. Come on.
Thank you, Mielle. I'm so glad to be here, and it's so fun to do this with you. So thank you.
Absolutely. It is, although it's a lot of work to put these podcasts together. So for anybody listening, if you're like, I want to do that, my answer is do it. Like, if that sparks you, by all means, do it. But I will tell you, you got to learn a little tiny bit of tech unless you hire. So the learning curve for me has been a tiny bit steep, and that's the only piece I'm like, ugh, I got to do some editing and I got to do this, I got to do that. But if somebody would just say, do you just want to meet interesting people all day and have fun conversations and hard conversations and deep conversations and explorative and curiosity conversations, I'd be like, oh yeah, sign me up, right?
I
So,
absolutely agree.
oh my gosh, yeah. So I love doing it. It's all the back work that I don't necessarily love doing. So I really appreciate you taking your time on today is a weekend, by the way, people, to spend time here to talk. And I really would love to hear some of your story of how did you go from the world of I'm a psychologist with a few extra letters after that to how you show up in the world to help people really understand the evolution of their soul.
Well, I think it's a great question. And it's funny that you bring this up because literally last night I was putting together the intro to this online course that I'm launching in just a few weeks. And I was trying to figure out how to tell the story. And so this is very timely. And what my conclusion is that, and I know this is very unusual, but when I was about 16, 17 years old, I took an honors psychology class as part of my, normal high school classes. And I immediately, within a week, knew this was what I was supposed to do. And I know that's not typical. And so, that immediately launched me into, of course, the psychology world. I was fascinated. I learned everything I could. I went through all kinds of different derivatives of what I thought I was supposed to do with it. But really, from a pretty young age, I knew I was supposed to be a psychologist. But in the midst of that, I also was, again, fortunate with how this all happened. But at the very same time that I started my master's program, which I had actually deferred for for a semester just to kind of get my wits about me. I was moving 3 states away. I didn't know anybody. And I thought, okay, let me just defer this, take a little more time. But had I not done that, I would not have gotten the job that I got because there was this new grant that came through in the student health promotion department of the same university. And everybody that had already started the program already had kind of jobs or assistantships or whatever. But had I not deferred that first semester, I would not have gotten that job. And what was beautiful about that job is that I was learning about the National Wellness Institute's model. I was learning about wellness and student health promotion, which was all health and wellness oriented. Whereas at the exact same time, I was learning about sickness and psychological well being in a not so well being way. So it was so, to me, fortuitous that it happened at the same time, because that was when I started realizing that there was a component of overall health that was spiritual health. We never learned that in my doctoral or my master's program or my doctoral program. So it was so fortunate and fortuitous that it just grabbed me. I really was enveloped by it from that point on, and I did all this reading because I wasn't getting that in my master's or my doctoral program. So fast forward, after I graduated and I was doing a postdoc, I actually did my research during that postdoc on the perception of integrating spirituality into the medical field or the psychological field. And it was really interesting to hear the responses. And so it's such, I talk about a person's soul path. And I look back at my own path and realize, wow, this was completely soul based all the way through because I did not set out as a young person to do soul work. I just somehow, it fell to me and integrated in who I am, what I do. And now I don't see any other way but integrating the soul with spirituality, healing, physical healing, medical healing, and psychological healing. I don't know if that answers your question, but it was just my own soul's path that got me here.
Yes, it absolutely does. And for the listeners who kind of know me, I'm gonna do a little tiny shameless plug here. And this is probably a little on the close to the woo end of things for folks, but I'm just gonna put it really straight. So not only do I have a traditional day job that falls under the boundaries of, oh, that's considered normal, but I also am very geeky in science and math and very spiritual to the point where I'm very engaged in the concepts around energy, evolution, soul journey. What does it really mean? How is it linked energetically to the science through numerology? So that being said, when you say, I feel like this is the pathway my soul has been guided to, I can 150% tell you, yeah, that is absolutely correct. Because we really are here coded with a very particular soul path that in this lifetime we are going to have the potential to execute if depending on our free will and choices. So that's part one. Part two is when you started telling me about your story, you said there were various, it was psychology, but there were various derivatives thereof. And so what I really want to say about that I think is so fascinating to me is we may not know the exact endpoint of this is how I am meant to show up in service. This is how I'm meant to show up in purpose. This is what really is the fulfilling piece for me, or this is my zone of genius, or all these catchphrases that we love to use. But oftentimes it doesn't look like what we think it's supposed to look like. So decades ago, you may have said, oh, as a teenager, I took this AP class and then I went on to college and I have all these certificates and degrees and so on and so forth, doctoral and da 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 da, and it's all in psychology and so on and so forth. And that's wonderful. However, that's only one possible expression of that piece. And now through your other work, you have realized, wow, this is still my place of service. However, it now looks a little differently because you took the opportunity to follow the chain of breadcrumbs by deferring the window before you started your course, and then by accepting a particular position and by doing other things. And so a lot of people say, well, so random. And I'm like, yeah, so not random, because the truth be told, that is actually your soul's journey. That is really the way it's supposed to play out, not necessarily the way we think it's going to look, but there's no mistake about it. And so when you wake up in the morning going, wow, how did this happen? My answer is because that's how it rolls. As far as how do we integrate whole wellness, like you, I'm very fascinated with the concepts of whole wellness. And we can actually talk about whole wellness through the whole integrative plane of your physical being, your emotional being, your mental being, your spiritual being. And all those things are not mutually exclusive. They are all interwoven one into the other and they all dance with each other. So the way that you come to your work, I think, is so beautiful because, like me, must I say, we're sort of two different versions of going down a similar pathway, just approaching it from two different directions. How do we integrate all these different planes of energy that exist simultaneously in this human expression of a soul journey? And how do we not leave anything on the table and still work our way through?
Yeah, and I want to comment on a couple of things you said, Meow, because it's so, I mean, it's so on target that, and I also joke that I live somewhere between science and woo, because
Yeah.
a lot of what I teach is from a scientific perspective, but then I see how the soul is woven into it. And so it actually gives a lot of credibility to go, oh, and so many people, when I explain why you can access your soul by certain kinds of eye movements and this and that, it's like they're like, oh, okay, that's what makes sense. So I do live between science and woo. And it's really fascinating because again, it was just last night, although I've reflected over this for decades about how I landed where I have and how I keep evolving. And it's really interesting because when I look back to that time and how synchronistic it was for me to start that job at the exact same time that I started my master's program, and I was learning about this National Wellness Institute's model, which I am not dissing at all. It's a great model. It's just not complete as far as I'm concerned. Because when you do deep work in a psychological realm with many, many, many clients, like I was, you realize that there are pieces that were missing in the overall model. And so I went back and actually I created my own wellness model after that. So National Wellness Institute, I believe, was created in 1959. And in I'm going to have to think about this, the end of, well, actually, it was around 2003, 2004, I started creating this model. And it's got 10 branches to it. And it's actually a tree and it's 10 branches, kind of like the tree of life. But I really like I call it the complex interplay between the branches, because you are absolutely right. It's not just the physical, it's not just the psychological. And, to me, there are 10 branches of the human condition that every human on this planet, at some point in their development, whether it's in this lifetime or other lifetimes, if you believe in reincarnation, you're going to have to find a way to master those branches in order to get through and feel well. So my model includes physical, psychological, social, interpersonal, which is not part of the National Wellness Institute's model, intellectual and occupational, environmental, financial, which is not part of that model. Also, their model does have the spiritual, but it does not have sexual health or recreational health. And I don't know anybody on this planet that is struggling financially that feels well. I don't know anybody on this planet that has strange interactions with another person or boundary issues or whatever those interactions are that feels well. And I also don't know anybody who has had some sort of sexual trauma or woundedness who feels well. And yet in the other models, those are not mentioned at all. So for me, it is that interplay from a wellness perspective. But then when you get down to the bottom of what's beyond all of that, it's the state of the soul that matters. Because if that state of the soul is wounded or has had a soul path that has taken them down a path that they weren't expecting, there's disruption in that person's wellness. And so to me, it's helping educate them that those junctures along the way, which may not be very comfortable for people, if people could start to flip the idea of something happening to them, instead looking at it as far as something happening for them to evolve, heal. I use the words evolve beyond because I don't want to just get someone to the point where they feel healed to where they were. I really do want to get them beyond where they were, because that's that whole idea of conscious evolution. But to me, that is whole person health right there, is when you can look at all those branches, help them understand how it's all dynamically put together, but then also realize that that free will aspect of them is really about their soul's evolution. It empowers them immediately. It helps them realize they have agency over whatever they stumble through. So it's really a multidimensional approach, but it is always something that people come out feeling good about, because I think a lot of traditional treatment is so focused on sickness that they don't realize that there's something beyond all of that. So, you're speaking, it's music to my ears to hear your approach with this. But this, to me, you cannot separate the soul from the psychology or the physical as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. And my belief is my belief. I'm not asking anyone else to buy into it if that's not for them. But I will say for me, I believe that our soul in this particular venture, this lifetime here on Earth, is here obviously for Earth School, to give lessons, gain lessons, and work through things that maybe were not resolved in other expressions of that soul, in other lifetimes, so to speak. So I absolutely believe that we're kind of here for the whole ride. And is the ride
Mhm.
always great? Well, no, it isn't. That being said, in order, what I consider the soul's evolution ultimately is that when you're done here on earth, your soul's off to from whence it came and will show up at some other time space continuum to go back and finish off things that maybe weren't completed here, and
Right.
so be it. In the meantime, I think it is I want to call it a little bit of spiritual bypassing is what I see a lot in the big healing circles, which is, oh, let's ascend and let's get ethereal and let's be spiritual and let's evolve and let's do all the things.
I agree.
And it's almost like, oh yeah, let's forget that we're actually housed in this human body and our humans hanging out here and has day-to-day human stuff going on.
Yeah.
So I think to not it's sort of like you got to bring everybody to the party. Like you can't leave somebody back to home. You got to bring everybody to the party. You got to bring your body to the party, and your emotions and your heart, your psychology, your mind, and also where's your soul from? From the 5D, from beyond the 3D. So everybody has to come to the party, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And that's just really it for me.
I
And
love it.
when we talk about, like, when people say, oh, I'm healed, or whatever their thing is, I really sometimes I got to think how to say this kind of politically correct. I i think some people take the idea of I'm healed as if there will never be a revisiting of some given wounding event, let's call
Right.
it. And to me, it's a little bit like, when you're a kid and you fall down and you get a good enough cut on your leg that it actually makes a little scar. You don't carry the pain of the event necessarily there, but you have the scar that shows you had some event. Now, you may have the recollection of how you fell on the ground and got the cut on your leg, but whether you choose to carry the pain that you had for the few weeks before it healed over and scarred over, that's a whole different deal. And then when you look down at your leg, you're like, oh, I got this little scar there. It does remind you of a different time, it does remind you of a different event. But because you have choice, you can either say, oh my God, that scar on my leg is still killing me and this is terrible and it's horrible. Or, yeah, I remember I did that, but you know what? I learned a lesson out of it. Like, don't be running barefoot over the hard, sharp rocks, whatever the thing is, right?
Right. Right.
And so I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes when people say, get healed, get whatever.
Yeah.
I do feel that there's a place where you have to look at what are these things that have brought these feelings, emotions, and fears, challenges, and difficulties forward into your adult life. But it is a choice to hold on to them or not hold on to them. And the fact that you had the event, that's your scar. And here's the truth to me. And again, I'm not asking anybody else to buy into it, but it is my belief. Nobody's getting off planet Earth here without a ding and a dent. Sorry. Why? Because you chose to come here.
Yeah.
You chose to come here and get dinged up. Why? Because when you play hard, you get dinged up.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's that.
I love that. And I am so glad you brought up the spiritual bypassing because, and I want to throw out another angle of this because I do think that people inherently want what feels comforting for them. They don't really want to do the discomfort. So a lot of times it's like a band-aid. They want to do the spiritual because it's soothing or it's comforting or they feel enlightened or whatever it might be. But if they're not doing the human work, they're really not evolving. And they're really not going to heal anyway, because to me, healing is part of evolving is part of healing. But you can't bypass that. You can't skip over doing the human work. And in fact, in some ways, you're delaying your spiritual, quote, enlightenment if you are skipping over that, because, inherently the human condition is messy, painful, discomforting, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And the other part that I want to add in there is the difference between soul and ego. because that's another big part of this that's really important. When someone has that chip on their shoulder that, oh, I'm beyond that, or I'm past that, or wow, I don't need to go to therapy, or I don't need to go do this because I'm beyond it. That always concerns me, because what that tells me is there is like a blockage. There's like there's not really, that's really not saying they're healed. It's saying that, again, they think they're above doing the human condition. And yet I don't think any human on this planet is above that. And, I want to give you an example of this, because in my practice, this was years ago, but I had this woman who, she was very into the spiritual. She was an avid reader. She read everything she could about really every aspect of spirituality that she could, but she had a really terrible life. And she didn't, she was in this, relationship, this marriage that she did not assert herself at all. She was a doormat in her personal life. And basically what would happen is she would always say, well, I'm gonna meditate on that, or I can't remember the term she used, but she was going to, it was the equivalent of like pulling a tarot card or whatever about it. And it's like, well, no, let's leave that part out of this and do the human condition part of it, because that is part of the spiritual part. And then I had another person who right around the same time said, well, I'm going to pray on that. I'm going to pray on that. And at one point I said, I think we need to live God out of this, because this is not a God thing. This is a human thing. And, I was not trying to offend at all. But that bypassing piece, like you said, is so common for certain people. And you can go get as many intuitive readings, you can get as many, I don't know, whatever spiritual avenue people go down, but that does not mean you're actually doing your work. And I think that was a very key place the key point to lay out there. And I appreciate you saying that, Neil.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Because I think there's probably a point in my life, like maybe I was in that position myself. I'm a work in progress. Believe you me. For
We
the
are.
listeners out there, I am not that evolved. Okay, I'm still a little prehistoric sometimes, and there it is. And I have things that set me off, like every other human. I would love to say they don't, but that would not be the truth. And I think, just to really reiterate, I think you and I are saying pretty much the same thing. It's just that I see folks sometimes that, and it's because of the ego, and we're going to talk about that ego a lot, really. It is almost as if they're unable to discern, like they've compartmentalized. There's a spiritual piece, and then there's an emotional piece and a physical piece. And the fact that things are actually truly interwoven, that's the block that I hear when someone says they're very spiritual, but yet their personal life is like a nightmare.
Mhm.
And what I feel is going on for those folks, they're human, is wrapped up in the ego portion of the mind, which you know as well as I do. Its job is to save your butt, keep you alive, do all the things. That's the whole function of that ego portion in our mind. And, I'm not recreating the wheel here. You can find that information just about anywhere. But its job, and people go, oh my God, don't believe your ego. I think the ego is so valuable for so many reasons. One, it's there to keep you going. Like if you were a caveman, that's the thing that keeps you alive, basically, is the survival mode. But two, it served a purpose at the time that it served a purpose.
Mhm.
So, when your ego is telling you certain things as a young child, it in that moment, it served a purpose because it was what it was doing the task it was assigned to do, keep you going, save, keep you
Protect
safe,
you.
even
Yeah.
if it's a lie, protect you, even if it's a lie. But
Mhm.
that's the job. Okay, great. Now, fast forward, you grow up a little bit and you've got some other things going on, and the reality is our mind is really like we are not our mind. And
Mhm.
people go, what do you mean we're not our mind? Well, if you're talking to yourself and you can actually hear your voice talking to your brain, that's a clue that you are not your mind. So if you can get to that like, oh, okay, I think I got that, then what I would say to you is sit back and take a deep breath, right? Because when you ask someone like, well, how do you feel about blah blah, and they give you this instant response like right away, well, most of the time that's because that's their what we call their gut or their inner
Right.
compass or their whatever phrase you want to put to it. So to me, we take our brain, or we take our humanness brain, and we have this save your butt side, the ego side that likes to tell you trash. And
Hmm.
then you have your true soul, inner northern compass, higher self side that's really trying to do the best thing for you in the long haul.
Yeah,
And you can't actually be in both sides at any given moment, right?
right.
You're in A or you're in B. Granted, you're there about 1 trillion times a day, but you can't exist in both places
Hmm.
simultaneously. Although we think we can, but that's not so. So, the piece that I find very interesting about this whole ego higher self side thing with the human experience is, how do we help people learn to step outside of that for a little bit and be the observer, be the bird's eye view, be the, I don't know, whatever phrase you want to put to that. Like you're not in it. You're looking at it, but you're not in it, so that you've removed the things that we attach to either side, whether it's let me attach to the spiritual thing and that's my saving grace, or let me attach to what my ego's dissing out and that's going to be the ticket. I think, to me, a piece of your soul's evolution of being able to work through our human challenges is not to negate them or ignore them, but to be able to discern, when is it my mind, my ego, doing its job, trying to save my butt, even though it
Hmm.
really is difficult at times. And when is this really my soul that's coming through here?
Well, and I think, and I appreciate that question and that pondering as well, because I tell people our heads can lead us wrong, our hearts can lead us wrong, but our soul always speaks truth. It cannot lie. Our soul cannot lie. But the challenge is a lot of people mistake where the information is coming from as truth. And so, I even argue that really higher self has nothing to do with ego, because I think higher self is an extension of our soul to source. Our ego is really the human aspect that has kind of muddied the waters somewhat for what it thinks is going to be protective of us. And I would also argue that our soul, actually does not want us to improve sometimes, because it mistakes change and discomfort for something that's bad. And so our ego is in a place oftentimes where, oh, I think we might have lost connection here.
I got you.
Okay, perfect. So I think the ego part of it is really interesting. But I do help people. One of the things I almost immediately, when someone wants to do the soul work, I teach them how to get into that soul space rather than listening from the head. But I also teach them that they're going to have an argument going on for a while. They're going to have an argument that their heads will try really hard to pull them off track, because again, our heads see it as protection, whereas sometimes our ego is afraid of truth. So
I think
because,
our ego's very afraid of truth,
yeah, and
because the truth is going to be the death knell to the ego,
exactly,
ultimately.
exactly.
Oh, yeah, I think our ego's afraid of truth.
So it is partially, it's the starting point is going through the gut reaction. It's going through that yes, no that you feel deep within. It's that there are 3 steps that I take with people when I'm starting to teach the soul. And one of them is to, again, I get them through kind of a visualization and it's not quite a meditation, but it's I get them to a very quiet space through both breathing and kind of an eye positioning kind of thing. And then the second part of that is, once they're in that deeper soul space, I start to ask them yes or no questions. Because the yes or no, your soul will start to respond. It's like muscle training. Your soul will start to respond if you ask yes no questions, and you will start to hear it. And it's almost like it's a sensation, it's an experience of a yes or no. It's not really a word of a yes or no, because the word of yes or no, again, is much more of the ego base. But if you, in the gut of your being, again, the soul doesn't reside anywhere, but there is this gut reaction that is deep within you. And I teach them first the yes no thing. Then I teach them the next one is what they would regret more. Because sometimes if they're trying to learn how to make a decision, if they can go to that reaction, that gut reaction, and say, what's your gut say? Sometimes the generalized answer is not there yet. You have to kind of train it how to do it. So the yes no question, and then I will say, what would you regret more, this or this? And then I have them listen, experientially listen for that yes no. Because here's another little tip about soul-based communication and soul-based living, is that there is no deeper regret than a betrayal of your own soul. So basically, if you go to that regret point, what would I regret? Oh, well, my gut says, wow, I would regret this over that. Then it starts to, again, it's more muscle training for that soul speak. It's like then you get very much deep into the core of who you are, and you're able to, again, kind of like learn how to listen in a different way. But it's the yes no question first, it's the regret part second. And then once you have those two kind of exercised and you can listen pretty consistently, then you can just go straight to the gut and say, what does my gut tell me? And then it's like the muscle is already tuned enough for you to go straight to that gut reaction. Now, a lot of people think the gut reaction is like a visceral response to like a fight or flight kind of situation. It's not the same thing, because our fears, fight or flight, is ego based. So it does not come from the same place anyway. It's that gut visceral kind of reaction. But it takes a long time to tune that muscle, because for centuries, I would say thousands of years, our civilizations have been so disconnected from soul-based living that they have learned to use their heads and, quote, logic over their souls, whereas ancient societies lived through their souls all the time. So it's almost like we have to reteach people how to go to that soul space and live from there. But I'll tell you what happens when people can, and I call it soul-based living, but when people can master that soul-based living, their lives become so much easier, because they are not going through these poor decisions. Oh, geez, they hit their heads going, oh, geez, I wish I would have, listened to myself. Because we all know what happens when we go against our gut reactions. The world falls apart. We have regret. We smack ourselves on the head going, geez, why didn't I listen to myself? So it's a retraining, and it's not a new training. That's why the words new age kind of get me a little bit, because it's not something new. It's actually bringing ourselves back to our ancient wisdom that basically is not new. It's not a new thing to listen to your soul. It's just we have to get that back into our everyday living in order to live to our highest good. What is, I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, what do most people struggle with? Number one is the relationships in their lives. Why is that? Because they're not listening to their guts. They're listening to what they're thinking that they're supposed to do in relationships. And number two is, the second thing people come to me for is, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. So it's relationship stuff, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. Those are the top two things that people struggle with. But if people could just get to that soul-based living, it would simplify relationships. It would simplify, where they're supposed to go in life. But it all goes back to that learning to tune that dial. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us in our modern age, is we've lost the ancient wisdom.
Yeah, I agree. I think in our advancements, and we've had some great advancements. I mean, we had some amazing advancements in technology and, learning and what's available, and I think that's great. But in the meantime, it's come at a cost, and it's come at a cost of, I think we are becoming more disconnected than we are connected. We're more removed from everything that is fundamentally designed to allow us to move through our life journey with more ease, because we compound it with things. If you think about how amazing, when you really think about it, how amazing is it that your soul drops into this vessel and the things that this vessel can do for you in this lifetime. I mean, it's really phenomenal when you think about it. And then we take that to mean like, oh, so now you've got this great thing called a body and you can go do all these things, but you've forgotten the fact that you're also connected to everything else. You're connected to everything else around you. Everything, to get all if the science end of it, everything's energy, right? So technically you're connected to everything if you really want to
Exactly.
skinny it out. So you can't really walk through this life like you're wrapped in some kind of bubble wrap, because you're not. You're just
Yeah.
not. So I think that is a huge discord for people who, and I'll say, just, it's having lack of awareness, and
Yeah.
it's not good or bad. I'm not saying it's bad if you don't have awareness. I'm just saying not everybody's like tuned in. Not everybody
Yeah.
is even aware that they're stumbling their way through their lifetime. They
Right.
don't necessarily see or perceive that some of their behaviors and actions and patterning and all the things is really not of any help to them. But again, I think, everybody's ready to come to the table when they're ready to come to the table, and you can't force anyone to do anything. So when I think it's interesting that you'll have clients who come to you and their, shall I say, superficial symptom that they come to you is, my relationship sucks and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. Okay, that's great. I personally believe when you get it right on the inside, when you get your information with your soul lined up properly on the inside of you, then the outside of you is going to show up okay.
Right.
And to take that one step further, I also truly feel like, well, what you see before you is a reflection of where you may or may not be needing to get a little help.
Hmm.
So if you look at your life, you're like, my life sucks. Well, okay, maybe that needs a little closer examination. If you're wandering, career path to career path and day to day, like, I'm not really sure why I'm here, well, maybe a conversation with yourself, not like talking to yourself in your head, but
Right.
really getting connected,
Hmm.
would shed some light on that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
gosh, I think it's just so fascinating to me. It really is.
And we could spend probably hours talking about awakenings and dark nights of the soul and everything else that kind of does wake people up. I mean, that would be a whole other weekend worth of conversation,
Right.
and that's why, as a psychologist, and I look back to when I was learning wellness at the same time I was learning sickness, but I look back both at my own life, my own challenges that I've had, but then also, which have informed me, honestly, to be able to help people through their challenges, whatever they are. But I just realized, early on, which was really helpful for me, that our pain really is a catalyst. Our discomfort is a catalyst. And instead of going, oh, poor me, or oh my gosh, I need to, well, there's many methods that people take to calm their discomfort. But if they could lean into their discomfort just long enough to interpret what is there for them, that's where those golden nuggets are. That's where their soul is. Their soul is screaming in those most difficult moments for some sort of change to take place. And yet it's one of those things where, again, we're told that pain is a bad thing.
I
Discomfort
don't think
is a
pain's a
bad
bad
thing.
thing.
No, I agree,
I
but we're
really don't.
taught
I
that.
mean, I hate to say it, pain is kind of what lets you know you're alive.
Right.
I know that sounds horrible, but, and I don't mean it that way, whether it's physical, mental, or whatever. But there is a gift in it. There's
Yes,
absolutely a gift in
absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if you were an athlete, I don't know, let's say you're a tennis player. If you only stay at the same level of comfort and you're a tennis player and you don't ever challenge yourself and you don't fall down and skin your knees and you don't hit your head and, with your racket every now and then, which none of which is great, or you don't lose to somebody that you thought you were certainly a higher athlete that you could beat in competition, and that doesn't feel very good either, then how do you up your game? How do you
Right.
grow? How do you expand? How do you transform? How do you evolve? And so I think to extrapolate that on a big scopy level for most of us, I think when we're in it, we're pretty invested in the, boy, this sucks. Wow, really
Yeah,
not loving this.
the
And
ego race.
it's yeah, and it's not always easy in the moment of something horrible to go, well, there's a good side to this. I mean, because you're so wrapped up in it in the moment. But the perspective when you can get a little bit outside of it
Right.
is, wow, look what this has allowed me to do. Look what this has
Right.
brought forward. And that's a great
Yeah.
reminder for people, because I think especially people who really struggle with either like the mental looping
Mhm.
or, different forms of depression. I think when they're in it, like sometimes when you're in it, you can't see out of it. You're like, well, how do I see out of this? But truth be told, if you can sit in discomfort for a little bit, it's going to
Yeah.
shift. It's going to shift.
Yeah.
Nothing stays the same.
I have
Oh
a
my
joke with
gosh.
I have a joke with my clients that because so many of them say when they're going through difficulties in between sessions, so many of them say, "Yeah, man, I always ask what Dr. Kelly would say or what Dr. Kelly would do." So the joke is that like I should be giving people little bobbleheads that look like me because sit them on a shelf somewhere because I've had people tell me left and right that they stop long enough to go, "Gosh, what would Dr. Kelly say?" And they always come back to, yeah, and I know what you'd say first is, what do you think you're supposed to learn from this? Because
Right?
it's a simple question. There might be a complex response, but it's stopping the discomfort long enough to go, oh, wow, what am I supposed to be learning from this?
It's the
And
disruptor.
it's and
Yes.
it's beautiful because, it disrupts the process of feeling
Yes.
bad long enough to go, oh, well, wait a minute, because we always feel better when we think we're getting something from something than feeling like something's being taken away. And so
Absolutely.
that question of what am
Yeah.
I supposed to learn from this? And even if you can keep that in mind as you're going through the discomfort, there's a whole, it's like some of the discomfort lifts to the point where it's not quite as bad. It doesn't suck quite as bad, but it's
Right.
because they can get the vision to the other side of it to say, okay, I don't know what it is right now, but I know I'm going to understand this later. And
Yeah.
so again, it's empowering. It's the positivity. It's the wellness rather than the sickness. It's the, you know,
Yeah.
it's
And
basically getting beyond it.
it's also the pause between. So I think, when you're in that survival mode of the fear, the anxiety, the all the things that, get your nervous system all jacked up and you can't think straight and you can't make a decision. When you can disrupt that just for a second, now it opens the avenue for that pause in between where you
Absolutely.
can now, what are my possibilities? What are my whatever? You can get curious. But without that disruptor,
Yeah,
call that the disruptor of awareness, whatever you want to call it.
right.
Without that, then you don't get that little itty bitty pause. And it doesn't have to be a long pause, but just
Yeah.
enough to like, shuffle the show a little bit. And then, that opens the next door and then the next door and the next door. Yeah.
Yeah, there is always a learning curve no matter what. That is the human condition. And so if you can just
Yeah.
pause and get that little, like you said, disruptor in there, it's like a little bookmark. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
wait, I'm gonna know that I can go back to this bookmark at some point when I'm feeling like I've got a better perspective. But it's really beautiful. And as you're talking, one of the things I'm thinking about is, it's the human condition seems so uncomfortable, so complex, and it is. But the thing is, and the soul seems so complex and so, distant from people. But the truth is, with our conversation of the last 5 minutes, if people could just take that much of it and go, oh, okay, so I don't have to get mired in that discomfort. I don't have to get stuck. I don't have to be blocked. I don't have to feel like a victim. That right there is the simplicity of the soul because the soul is going to get you through it one way or another. It's just a matter of can you learn and glean whatever you're supposed to along the way because you are going to feel better after that discomfort passes if you've stayed open to whatever it is there to be taught.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Boy, I could just talk for hours with you, but
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap up because otherwise
Well,
we'll be here all day. So let our listeners know where can they find more Dr. Katherine Kelly so they can hear what would Dr. Kelly say.
so the easiest way, of course, is to go straight to my website. And if you go to my website, it's www.drkatherinetkelly.com. Don't forget the T because there's an orthodontist in Minnesota that you will get instead. But the Catherine, yeah, I laugh. KatherineTkelly.com. And if you would like to sign up for the newsletter, you will immediately get a download of my soul health model. You'll be added to the newsletter. And then also on my website, there's tons of information on this website. It's very complex in a good way. But you're going to get information about my YouTube videos. You're going to get information about blogs that I write. If you are interested in learning more, if you're a practitioner or a coach, you can find the information about, I call it my Soul Health Scholars program, where I'm teaching people to do what I do so that they can help others evolve in a different way. So that www.drkatherineTkelly.com is probably the fastest way to get to social media and everything else.
Fabulous. I will put this in the show notes for everyone. And I
Wonderful.
thank you so much for your time. It's been a really enlightening conversation, really, really juicy, good stuff.
Yeah, good.
And I just appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I agree, we could have talked for hours.
Absolutely.